early stage fund, and my connectivity to the fintech. I was part of a team with the first data CMO in the late 90s to produce the first MasterCard branded gift card. It was called Gift Americard. And then I didn't do anything until pretty much my son started to do things in the fintech, and then he's right now doing Point Up, one of the unicorns flying in the space here in the Silicon Valley. And then myself, I'm involved right now with a startup called Looptronics, where we have a patent on IoT and payment/authenticating system through the wearable jewelry. So I'm wearing a ring that it's like an aura ring that happens to be an instrument for future payments. So enough about me. I'd like to have the panel to be introduced, and then let's start with the Julia, and then we go through the session.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Great to see you. My background is fintech. I started in fintech in 1996 and worked on sell side for companies like JP Morgan, Prudential Securities before it was bought, and other sell side firms. And then when hedge funds came to be, jumped over to D. Shaw, and from there to Moose Partners, which is a very large family office, and then to a pension fund with 110 billion in AUM at the time, and it was COO and CTO. So I looked at a lot of fintechs trying to sell to me, and now that I'm part of a boutique consulting firm, an advisory firm, we build technology for startups, and we help buy-side firms and banks improve their infrastructure. And so we see a lot of flow. So I guess when I make my remarks on fintechs, I'll try to be very specific about what it is, which sector and which industry or sub-industry we're talking about. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Julia. And then Joel.
Thanks. Thanks for the chance to be on the panel with people like yourself and Julia. Nice to meet everyone. My name is Joel Abramson. My background is really in the alternate network space. I was kind of on the portfolio manager track, did my CFA, and then I was approached by a fintech firm called Onsite IQ. So my firm is called Onsite IQ. Really, it's kind of more the commercial real estate space. So I guess more PropTech would be a better definition of it. But we work with asset managers, in the asset management space for equity and debt shops, as well as other stakeholders in real estate development, really for the opportunistic and value add investments. It's pretty interesting, like give a quick background on our firm. It was actually founded by one of the lead engineers for the Department of Defense who created the military's equivalent of Google Earth. So a long time ago, they basically fly drones over the war zone to detect IEDs to protect American troops. And they would do this by analyzing the movements in soil. So he essentially teamed up with our CEO who had a background in civil engineering and AI, and they're bringing that data collection and analyses sort of process to live construction sites with kind of the same goal of reducing that risk and providing visibility into the delta of the asset for different investors. So kind of just working with really everyone at the top of the value chain, GPs, LPs, developers, lenders, to kind of reduce risk and efficiently manage multiple development sites running concurrently across multiple geographies.
Well, thank you very much, Joel. And Julia, it looks like there's about 18% decline in the global funding right now for the fintech in general. And then there's still action going on. There's about 30 plus births to the unicorns. So that is kept at the even keel level. Asia is down 44%, so that's a big drop. But I wanted to find out from you, like, what do you think in the terms of the investability right now in a fintech? What does that world look like? I know that investors usually like the early seed investments versus the like more established companies, because they seem to be a little bit overvalued. So what's your take on that?
So from anecdotal evidence, investors that we speak with, mostly trying to help our the startups that we work with, what we hear is that there's very little investment going into, or relatively less investment going into later rounds. We pretty much, what we hear a lot of times is we want to look at pre-seed and seed, and we don't want to look at the later rounds because we can go to the public markets and it's much, much cheaper, right? So I think that this is what explains the reduced investment in the later round companies. Just the drop in the public market, right? Yeah. So I think that something needs to change there for the market to get back into the equilibrium. But it's really great news for pre-seed and seed companies, I think, right? Because this is their opportunity to really get a lot more time.
Yeah. So if they rushed in, then they were already established, and then they IPO'd, then in the right space now. But all the other guys are kind of in the more of a trouble of getting.
I think if right now you're raising later rounds, if you're lucky, you have the same investor, funding you later rounds. And if they're not, getting getting someone else is going to be more difficult. And a lot of startups tell us, hey, we're going to give you we're going to take some stuff out of our safe and we'll give you better terms. So there is definitely a readjustment in the market that we see. But again, it's anecdotal.
Sounds good. Well, Joel, let me ask you a question pertaining more to your expertise. So you're in the real estate, right? How do you apply? I mean, what are the tools? Are you finding in efficiency in the fintech in general? What is it that you're using that we can learn from the real estate and your data analytics aspect of your firm?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I will also comment on the first question of Julia. I think that while my experience is much more anecdotal, working at this firm, we have seen that we're later stage, and it's not 2010 anymore. So it's definitely interesting. A lot more pressure on that funding side. But to answer the question, so the inefficiencies, I think in terms of data collection and usage, it's interesting because I think we're a bit unique in the sense that the data collection we do wasn't really possible before. Just in that I think the camera technology hadn't been really developed, and the idea hadn't been put in practice to go inside of a job site. So I mean, the easiest way to think of what we do is like Google Street View, but inside a job site and every single week. And so basically this visual data is mapped and then provided to owners and lenders and really providers of capital, so they can visit the site from anywhere. It doesn't matter if they're in New York or Singapore, right? They can go to different locations and see exactly what's going on, verify progress, do all these things. But I think most importantly is, I was reading an article the other day by FMI and Autodesk, and I think it was saying 95% of all collected data on in the real estate development, like construction process, goes unused. And so it's interesting because it really comes down to a lack of integration, a lack of like digestibility of this information. And so really what we're trying to do is it's a data play. It's how can we come to your site every single week, collect these images, and then go one step further by using this visual data set as alternative data to publish insights in a really palatable way. So even those far away from the construction like they're not there, they're not contractors, they're not on site all the time, but they have all this risk. How can they use that information to get leading indicators on schedule, and kind of quantify those risks further than its volatility, right? Actually dive into what are the operational risks and long tail risks associated with opportunistic or value add investments, whether you're doing it directly or through a private equity fund. How can you kind of stay on top of that and avoid issues later down the line? I think saying over the pandemic, I think 70% of large projects were delayed by an average of 2 months, and this is it's millions of dollars in carrying costs and lost revenues. And so one bad apple doesn't ruin the bunch, but if you have 10 projects in a fund, and 7 out of 10 bad apples will ruin the bunch. And so this is obviously an important risk to be aware of. And this over-reliance on third parties, especially in real estate, is pretty unique to real estate. Just as a result of the way the industry is structured, I think it's important for investors to kind of see the devil in the details and see how the sausage is made, really, but in a way that doesn't soak up time, in a way that doesn't make it so that data goes unused, so they can kind of quickly and easily get those insights and see, okay, we're behind schedule, or okay, this is going to be an issue, and kind of have those conversations earlier, because it's good relationships dissolve pretty quickly when staring down the barrel of a $6 million claim, for liquidated damages on a large tower, and with shortage of labor. And I think earlier in this session, someone mentioned 800% outperformance by commodities. Like, those are drivers of real estate development costs and those compressed margins. So it's kind of all the more reason in this post-pandemic world to leverage PropTech and data in a way that allows you to standardize that risk, right, with that much capital.
Yeah. No, I see a total inefficiency. I think that the whole real estate in general, in terms of fintech, I think eliminating fax machines out of the equation and all the tools of the last century would be a first step to kind of creating innovation. So I'm glad that at least you have some sort of an imaging going on there. But I think that whoever is out there and listening, I think that getting this flow of the decision making and without using paper would create definitely a good fintech company or document assurance company out there. Because I've been watching the market, and I'm just surprised at how many industries are just waiting to be digitized. And I think that one of the I think the real estate is probably the worst. I think that it's kind of like not even 20th century. I think it's 19th century technology, which gets me into the next question, because I think, Julia, that the biggest advantage right now of all of the all of the technology that we have, and then fintech really squeezing all the efficiencies that we can get out of the transactional fees and such. I think that the data is playing more and more important role in the actual building of the revenue. And I just wanted to tell, ask you of what it is that you're thinking of different shifts where you find those different quote unquote inefficiencies or some unfound ways to make monies.
I want to go back to what Joel just said, that 95% of data is not used. And there are, if we start here on a list of where you could improve, we could go on forever. Let's stick with real estate just to continue, with that. Some of the very simple ideas that actually worked and they're easy to do are virtual tours. And a virtual tour of an apartment is extremely easy to do. And it was one of the best-selling IT projects for a while, because during COVID, people didn't want to actually, they would need a new space, but they didn't want to travel or, look at it. So that was a big hit. In terms of commercial real estate software, we advise a company that combined DCF, that is mostly done in spreadsheets, with the ability to store assets and add market data into the mix. And usually you would use 3 different systems and of course, Excel is one of them, right, to do all three. So there are huge efficiencies out of being able to just continuously monitor your portfolio real time using market data. And given how many data points there are to keep track of, and some of them have a positive trend, some of them have negative trend, and some of them are neutral. So for example, in Florida, if you are a real estate developer trying to figure out where to build a school or where to build a hospital, there are 70 data points that you can buy. It's all being tracked. It's very easily available. But what do you do with this information when maybe there are more people moving into the particular neighborhood, but at the very same time, something moves against you. So that's where we start using machine learning models and try to find patterns that an experienced real estate investor would simply have, right, from experience. We're trying to duplicate that. So in the real estate arena, there's definitely a lot to be done to make it more efficient. And of course, we can go into other sectors.
Yeah, so you think that the efficiencies now are grabbing all the different technologies that are out there and having a better picture, and therefore being more like a financially like squeeze out the potential and to make a better decisions
yeah, I think that there are two things happening. One is using tech to squeeze out the inefficiencies, to squeeze out either manual labor, reduce the cost of just hiring clerks essentially, right, who will shovel data. So that's one big issue for companies, because it becomes expensive and it becomes counterproductive. At some point, you reach the scale of operation where you really cannot invest more or analyze more deals or travel more, or as an RIA, you might say, like, I can't sign on more clients simply because you could be inefficient up to a point, and then everything kind of stops and you start growing. So what's really funny is when venture capital firms call us and say, we have firms, like, can you go in there and take a look at what's happening there, because they realize that the companies have reached their scale. So there's obviously the basic squeezing out of the inefficiency, right, that is happening across various buy-side firms. And then the second thing that happens is that we have really super cool tools, and we do have problems, and we do have data. This data is not being used, but companies are very cautious about picking up all of these new tools, and most of them are AI-based, multimodal AI, conversational AI. And these are really cool tools, but it's kind of scary to use them. And you have a lot of data, you can glean a lot of insights out of that data, but nobody's really rushing. And it's an interesting question as to whether that's psychological, or you don't know what you're going to find. I don't know what it is, but right. But it's a really tough sell. And I would say for banks especially, right, they'll sit there and think about, like, what is my attrition model? Why are people leaving me? And they have all the data. So for example, all the call center data when customers call and complain is there. And when we say, well, multimodal AI can give you a summary of all your problems, there are very few takers to actually go and create an ontology of these issues.
All right. Well, Joel, can you tell us more about the projects that you're involved in right now that are kind of edging up and venturing into the fintech area? Anything in specific that you guys are on the discovery of the new ways of making things happen?
Yeah, I think actually it's funny. I was going to comment this. Julie's answer is you definitely notice that hesitancy to use AI and trust it and rely on it. I think banks, having worked there, are very hesitant to kind of do anything new. And real estate is obviously a great example of not to your point, are there like an industry that isn't very innovative, isn't disrupted? I think compared to, I think next to agriculture and hunting, it's probably the least disrupted industry. And so selling a bank or selling a real estate developer or a private equity shop, like a real estate private equity shop, on trusting AI is so, it's almost like the hardest part of it, despite there being so many inefficiencies. And I think a good example of that ties into what we're doing, but also just generally doesn't make sense is like your typical provider of debt to an opportunistic project is, it's not going to be a bank. It'll probably be a hedge fund or private equity, just because they're going to be riskier. And they're relying on consultants, on people so the general contractor will say, okay, we've done this work, right? The subcontractor says, we've done this work. General contractor says, okay, they've done this work. They submit it to the owner. The owner says, okay, we've done this work. They submit the pay rec for the draw request to the provider of capital to get the next loan. And then they send out someone, they fly someone out to go say, okay, yeah, they've done that work. And then they release the funds. And it's something that, going back to the idea of virtual tours, like you could do that so efficiently, so easily with AI like, it's not out of this world to have AI look at a picture and say, that's a piece of drywall, or that is a ladder, right? That's a human, maybe identifying safety risks or quality risks. We're still a bit further out from it, it's a bit more subjective, but something like progress to release funds, which every payment in real estate is based on progress. That's what everyone cares about. Is, it's so easy to just do a virtual tour and say it's 50% drywall, right? It's really easy to say this is how much of the work is actually done, and you're reducing flights to the site. So there's like an ESG aspect. You're reducing time wasted, and you're reducing the amount of personnel and overhead on these sites. The loan servicing costs, whatever, it's 25 basis points, 15 basis points, goes down to almost zero, right? Mm-hmm. So that and it's purely a result of inefficiency of data. So I think both in collection and in use of it, right? No one's going to the site and collecting that data because they don't have the capacity or the efficiency to do it. And then no one is looking at it and saying, how can we tie this back to pay recs? How can we tie this back to schedule? So that's something that we're working on. Is we walk your site once a week, and we can tie it right into your financials so that you can just release funds instantly. And the downstream effects of that are not just the loan servicing fees being cheaper and better spreads for the lenders, but also the subcontractors they're all using accounts receivable financing. Like they're I don't know how they do it. They're dying, and because it's so expensive. And so for them to get paid faster, they push those discounts to owners, right? They'll give a 2% off hard cost, which is going to be $60 million on a $100 million project. So there's so many downstream and kind of second, like peripheral effects from just integrating and kind of relying on this AI and these features. And we are seeing some adoption of it. Like we have private equity shops we work with that, we're not heading to financials yet, but still use this as a way to centralize progress monitoring across 15 investments, right? They're in Chicago, they have invested in New York, in Seattle, and Miami. And so they have this dashboard that just tells them, look, this is your project health. It gives you leading indicators of what's going on. They can talk to their development partners. They can talk to their general contractors before it gets out of hand, so that when they wrap those up and they go to their investment, they go to their AG meetings, like they can easily report what's going on. They can have this ESG focus. They can talk about all these great, obvious returns on investment from just one instance of it. And that's just one instance of AI. Like they also have a visual record. So if there is ever an issue, you can go into the data, you can go into those granular. That is the whole benefit of big data, is not only do you get these insights, but you can go in and you can see, like, this is what's actually happening. Like I have a picture of this room that shows you didn't have this installed, and that disrupted these trades by 6 months, right? So you have the high level insights, then you also have the data and the details to really get down and dirty and make sure that your capital is protected, because you have a fiduciary responsibility there.
Joel, what you were just...
I have a question for Joel. So the application of what you're doing, it's not just usable for builders, but it's also like it can also be like regulatory, right? I mean, because you guys create these visual histories of buildings. Well, why can't it be used in places like Florida, where buildings are collapsing? Like, why aren't insurers making it mandatory to use your product?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And a good example that I use frequently. We do pretty well in Florida, and we've done well after that building collapsed. The term ambulance chaser is thrown around a lot. We do work with Zurich and Hartford and a few other companies that will subsidize us on projects for the exact reason you're talking about, Marty. It's like their risk engineers, their field risk team, their underwriting team can use this data to see beyond the numbers, to actually visualize what the operational risks are, what the safety risks are on a project. So you're right, like regulatory, it's really anyone at the top of the value chain. It's funny because real estate has this like weird, unique inverse relationship between transparency and risk. Like everyone at the bottom of the value chain, the subcontractors, the general contractors, they have the most visibility on what's going on and they have the least risk. But then the owners, the lenders, the insurance companies, right? Everyone up here has the most risk and the least transparency into what's actually driving that risk. I think if anyone here has ever had to renovate their kitchen or bathroom and deal with contractors, you know what I'm talking about, right? It's something that's in your house, you see it every day, but there's still issues, there's still delays and defects, there's still disputes over like payment and quality. So you can imagine whether you're an insurance company or a private equity shop or a lender, you have multiple buildings, 50 to 500 units. They're going on simultaneously across multiple geographies. It's only more complex. There's only more cross disciplines to be managed and more capital at stake. So yeah, to your point, like having the data synthesized into a digestible format, but then also having the record allows those field risk teams, those people that are far away from construction, both in proximity and in workflow and job function, to kind of understand the status of these risks in real time and be kept abreast of future risk on that project.
Marty, there is the point that you made about regulators driving some of the changes that will help tech, because let's face it, all of the processes that companies have, if a process is actually challenged, there's a lot of rigidity there, right? So a lot of fintechs that are useful and manage to stay away from a change in process become extremely popular. Point in case DUCO, DU.co. It's essentially a reconciliation tool. You don't need to change the process. You don't need to change the way that you're doing anything whatsoever. It's just a better diff tool than Excel would be. And immensely successful in terms of the number of clients and in terms of the later rounds that their VCs have given them. But if you look at some of the interesting regulatory pressures right now, I think it's the SEC that just came out with a rule that if there's been a cybersecurity attack, you have 36 hours to inform them and figure out like what exactly has happened. So that alone is going to start pushing companies to understand their data better. Do you see what I'm saying? Because you'll have to essentially say, like, here's what happened. And if you cannot do that within 36 hours, you're going to look really bad. So there will be changes, and we're consistently being pushed by the regulators.
So just to get some more clarity, real estate investing is a global sort of thing. People are addressing tokenization of real estate investment. And so, your approach on a constant basis, if you're an investor for investing in the Middle East, investing in Asia, investing in Latin America. And if you had an overlay of data like Joel has, or like compliance, there's a lot of, you can almost like Uber, right? Yeah. Where people are doing this, the data just sucks out, you're using your tool set to suck out data. And it's kind of similar to what Tom Farr is doing in the lab business, right? Overlay.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you could put it on a blockchain and release it, just and it's gonna help with ESG because you can add the emission certificates there. You can absolutely, that could be a very good auditing tool, right? That you could use in a blockchain environment, 100%.
Well, that makes sense. But let's move on to some kind of like a it's year 2022, and then there's a lot of technologies like one Web 3.0. There's a DFI. There's blockchains. There's digital lending, all kinds of different branches. So Julia, like when you look at those things and opportunities in the terms of the startup, which ones of those kind of opportunities you think they have the most rights to defend themselves, kind of moving on forward in terms of the fundability and the actual technologies? What do you think is happening out there?
I think that what's happening is, depending on where that market sector is in terms of its maturity, it's going to vary across different sectors tremendously. So investors need to be really, really careful at what is it that they're investing in, because for some sectors, AI is going to be transformational. For others, it's going to be a really long-term play. So if you're looking at banks, they will look for simple tools for the most part that will essentially exist as operational improvement tools, sort of like outside of their entire ecosystem, right? Like something that you plop down and it doesn't need you to change anything whatsoever in your process or the core platform or anything of the sort. And we see a lot of success with this really small and tactical plays that give you a lot of value immediately, right? So don't require a long implementation cycle, etc. And then for the really long-term plays, for companies that want to gain insight from their data, they will start using AI, but I see very, very long adoption cycle there. And I definitely see conversational multimodal AI being used more and more to automate call centers, to squeeze the costs where it's very, very obvious, right? How the cost is going to be squeezed out. For some reason, there's a lot of rigidity right now in reevaluating the target operating model and redesigning everything. There are very few takers, unless they're like digital natives, like Revolut, etc.
Yeah, well, there's still about 55 of unicorns being minted every year,
Yeah.
and that number has not really declined. So my question was like more like, what do you think? Like which one of the sectors have the best chances to, what areas that would have the most chances of becoming a unicorn in your opinion?
In my opinion, neobanks will continue to be hugely successful. They will just continue earning more and more followers in the they will start really honing in on the customers that they want, instead of wanting to be global players and kind of cover everybody. They'll start targeting women or mothers or whatever, and that's one thing that's going to happen. And in plays like in the areas like real estate, there's going to be a lot of systems and vendors that are going to be successful, that will squeeze the costs out of the process.
Great. And then let me ask Joel, what do you think that the future is going to be in the terms of, like, in your neck of the woods of doing the analytics and AI and the real estate? What do you see the trends? Do you see any companies that you know of besides yours that are trying to fight for the market and getting the gain of being the experts in that particular field? Or
yeah, I think so. And I think just to kind of make sure I understand your question, you mean in terms of like unicorns in the commercial real estate space, or?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, is there room for such growth, or what do you think the size of the potential opportunity is?
I think it's pretty massive. I think I'd agree with Julia. I think we're still very far away. Like, I'm sure everyone here knows the concept of crossing the chasm, and kind of the innovators and early adopters, the late majority of that whole principle. And I think that while that is very much true as a distribution within the industry right now, I think the industry as a whole is still, especially the commercial real estate industry, I can't really speak beyond that, but it's still very much in that, maybe not innovators, but it's almost like it's still pre-chasm. Like, there's still that that hesitancy to adopt technology. So, I mean, it's $1 trillion industry. Like, there's obviously a lot of potential. But I think what we're going to see is a niche get carved out. And I mean, you've seen it happen before, like the Procores or the Autodesks of the world, the BIM 360s. Like, there are technologies out there that have done this, and they carve out that niche, whether it's with architects or, you know, specifically within architects or like field engineers, and kind of grow from there. But it's a very like specific application, and then kind of go on. And I'm not trying to win the award for most shameless self-promoting. I know that's already been awarded to another panel, but
it's still open.
It's still open. Okay, perfect. I'll go for it then. No, what I was going to say is like, even our AI, like it's valid, it's reliable, it's accurate, and it's being used by a lot of our clients. You know, the majority of our clients rely on the fact that the visual record is there. Like, that in and of itself is useful to remotely access the site as an insurance policy almost. It's still not at the stage where people are going, oh yeah, I need these predictive insights for scheduling, because it's a behavioral shift. So yeah, I know it's sort of general commentary on it, but I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done before you see anyone really take over in the real estate industry like Procore has or other firms.
Right. Well, Julia, we have another minute or so, and then if you can wrap it up and say what do you think is the most exciting thing about the fintech coming in your neck of the woods?
I think that the coolest stuff out there is the ability to seamlessly look at text, video, pictures, and audio. I think that this is really going to be huge, and our ability to search and gain insights from not just text, but also video, and be able to translate that from, you know, any languages. There's 168 languages that it can actually process. I think that that's going to be really cool, and we see hedge funds jumping on that and gaining informational advantage out of it. But I think that companies, by and large, will be split into those that are seeking that proprietary advantage, informational advantage, and utilizing tech to gain it. You know, also companies that want to enjoy the operational advantage and squeeze out the costs, and they will also look for that. And then there'll be others that are basically saying, you know, we're not going to be the leaders in the field. We just wanted to continue doing things the way that we have, and will marginally improve. And we will see increasingly the bifurcation in the market between the philosophies. And that's the IT strategy and philosophy. That's what it is. And that is very, very difficult to change. It's going to be slow for some people. And then we'll see what shakes out.